We've heard this term nervous system thrown around a lot, and for good reason. The nervous system is behind everything we think, say, and do. But what exactly is our nervous system, and how does it influence everything that we're doing? Hi, I'm Emily Hamblin, host of the Enlightening Motherhood podcast, and I am so excited for today's guest, Leah Davidson, who's going to delve into all things nervous system. Welcome, Leah.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, I am so excited to have you. Can you briefly introduce yourself? Tell us what it is you do and why.
Absolutely. So, my name's Leah Davidson, and I am a nervous system coach, and I am also a speech language pathologist. And I share that because that's really where I began to understand the importance of the nervous system and all things nervous system related. So, I love to talk about the nervous system, and it's really my passion. I'm from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and we have a blended family of 5 adult children now. So I have learned over the years how to regulate, how to co-regulate, understanding different people's nervous systems. It's really been an amazing experience.
That's wonderful. And I love that you bring this up. You're on the other end of parenting. I'm right in the thick of it. My youngest is
There's hope.
3.
There's hope.
My oldest is almost 14. We're about to celebrate his birthday. And I think about half of our listeners would identify as being neurodivergent.
Mhm.
And many more than that have kids that either they know are neurodivergent or
Yeah.
they're suspicious. They're like,
Yes.
this kid doesn't
Yes.
seem to follow the typical mold. So
That's right.
we're going to
Yeah.
delve into all of that today too. But let's start really
Perfect.
quick. What is the nervous system? I know we've
Perfect.
heard the term, but what does that
Mm.
mean?
Well, that's it, right? We've heard the term. You probably even learned about it in your biology class, but what is it and why is it important? It essentially is the way the brain and the body communicate with each other. It is our communication system sending signals back and forth. And its main responsibility is for our survival. So it is looking out for us. It is behind everything that we do. It's running a lot of things on automatic, your breathing, your heart rate, your digestion. And it is also taking in all the cues of everything that's going on around you, everything that's going on inside you, what's going on in between you. And it puts all these things together and it makes an assessment as to whether you need protection, whether you're in danger, or whether you're good and you can be connected, you're in safety. So
Mhm.
that's what the role of the nervous system is. It's our survival. And it taints and frames and creates a lens through which we view the entire world.
Okay, this is fantastic. As you're saying that, it sounds like it's really similar to what I teach about our sensory processing and our 8 senses. How do those two terms tie together? Is it the same thing or is there just a lot of overlap?
There's a lot of overlap because we have all the different senses. And one of the things that the nervous system does is it does what we call it neurocepts. Now, that is a term that was coined by Stephen Porges, who was the creator of really the founder of the polyvagal theory. He, in the past couple of decades, has really done a lot of work in the area of the nervous system and understanding it. So, what neuroception is it is taking in all the different senses of what's going on, what it perceives and what it senses, but there's no cognition involved with the
Mm,
nervous system. So perception requires some cognition, whereas neuroception, it's like underneath that. Like it's kind of like your spidey senses, I call it.
yes.
It's a combination of intuition and what's going on. So it is like an extra part of our senses.
This is so good. This reminds me of a coaching call that we had years ago in my membership. And there was a mom who was trying to get help with feeling overwhelmed, and she had a kid like climbing all over her. And she broke down crying and she's like, I'm sorry, we'll do this later. And later she sent me an email and she said, I'm trying to identify the thought I was having that caused me to break down there. And I said, I think you were just overstimulated.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
don't think there was any conscious or even subconscious thought going on. I think your body just
Yeah.
went, like your fire alarm went off. And I said, it's
That's
totally
right.
fine. We set up
Yeah.
another time to chat. It was
Yeah.
okay. But
Yeah.
to release that worry that a lot of people have when we learn about the power of thought, sometimes we think that thoughts are everything. And then to
Hmm.
learn actually, they're just a piece of the puzzle. It's
That's
been
right.
really empowering.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's also interesting to know is, the nervous system does this assignment of safety or danger. So if it assigns you safety, you go into a state of connection, and this is where you are able to communicate and you have access to your thinking skills and your CEO, as I call her, those executive function skills. You also have, curiosity and compassion and patience, resilience, all those good things that we want to have. We have to be in a regulated state to access those. When our nervous system determines that we are in danger, and this is not necessarily actual danger, like
Mm.
your client there, she's not in danger, but there is the nervous system perceives danger for whatever reason. It will send you into that state of protection. And when you go into that state of protection, whether it be a state of activation, which is more of a hyper aroused state, or a state of more a shutdown, which would be a hypo aroused state, we actually lose access to our CEO. We don't have the capacity to have the thinking skills. It literally is blocked. We have enough that we can get by, but this is why when people are so overwhelmed, you often just will even say like, I just can't think straight. And I always say to people, well, it's because you can't. And
Yeah.
it's not because there's a weakness or there's something wrong with you. Your nervous system is in a protective mode. And when you're in a protective mode, it's not a priority to make decisions and think and be curious and be compassionate. It's like, I am in crisis and I need survival. And so it's going to move all the resources towards survival. So thinking
Mhm.
does not become a priority. So
Mm.
that's exactly what was happening for her. There was no thought behind it. Thoughts are amazing. I love mindset. You have to be regulated. If you want to change your thoughts, you want to look at your thoughts, you need to first come and take care of what's going on with your nervous system.
Okay, Leah, I love a lot of what you're saying here. And it's so, again, so validating that you're saying it's not necessarily whether it's real danger or perceived danger. And again, it's not even that logical thing because if we think about one of my kids who has autism and ADHD, whenever we change a plan, especially if it's last minute, even if it's a change that this child likes and something that they want, I can tell it causes like some stress in their nervous system. I see their breathing deepen, I see their jaw clench. And this kid's a little older now. We've worked through a lot of skills to handle it, but that kid still kind of needs that minute to like re-regulate their nervous system before they can be like, oh, okay, yeah, this sounds like fun. And it's easy as a parent to say, what's the big deal? You're not in any danger. You're still safe. You were safe before, you're safe now. It's really easy to want to say that. And honestly, me of 8 years ago would have said that. Come on, it's not a big deal. You want to do this. Why are you freaking out? Because he used to have meltdowns over these last minute changes. If I tried to surprise him, like, guess what?
Yes.
Today we're not doing what you thought. We're doing this amazing, awesome thing. And he would melt down.
Yeah.
And it really upset me. Obviously,
Yeah.
this was years ago. It really upset me. But now I understand. Oh, that's just his neuroception perceiving a threat because what he thought would happen isn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what we see with people who are neurodivergent is that transitions are hard. And part of the reason why they're hard is it's hard if you're in an activated state to calm down. It's hard if you're in a shutdown state to get more activated. And that's why predictability becomes important. See, the nervous system is constantly looking for safety. It thrives in safety. It wants to always return to safety. And so we as individuals kind of have different definitions of what safety is to our own nervous systems. A lot of times what safety is to our own nervous system is familiarity. So
Mm.
what is the regular thing? So what may be safe to you may not be safe to me, just simply because we've gotten used to something.
Yes.
The challenge with familiarity is that we can be familiar with something that's actually not very good for us. But
Mm.
because we're familiar to it, our nervous system, it prefers that comfort of familiarity than doing something that's different or out of the unknown. And so there's a lot behind it. The nervous system, it's kind of simple just for
Mm.
our survival, but there's all sorts of nuances and it's very, very unique, which is why I think it's so worth investing not only understanding your own nervous system, but gaining insight into the nervous system of the people around you, especially your kids, your partner. And I know that, having that with my own children, understanding like it's not just parenting across the board, this is how I do it. I really had to take into account, okay, this child, their nervous system requires this. And so I'm going to
Mhm.
approach it a little bit differently. They need more, priming or cueing. They need more co-regulating. They need me to, maybe hold them. They need to have less stimulation, more stimulation, constantly looking at that. And it's easier when you understand the nervous system because you don't make a judgment on it then. It's just, there's nothing wrong with the kid. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just, oh, okay, this is what their nervous system needs.
Mm, that's so great. So, as you were saying, Leah, about how our nervous system sometimes becomes comfortable with dysregulation, you brought me back a number of years to when we were foster parents. And we had quite a few foster children over the years. We were the emergency placement home in this teeny tiny town that we lived in. It was a wonderful experience and it was intense sometimes. We had one child that we had long term who I honestly felt like he preferred dysregulation. I know that sounds weird because
Yeah.
obviously, like
Yeah.
prefrontal cortex, he didn't want it,
Right.
but it seemed like he was often trying to agitate someone to become dysregulated, and he almost simmered out. Like you could almost see the sigh of relief whenever someone started to yell around him.
That's exactly it. Because safety becomes dangerous when you're
Mm,
not used to it. Or you've never experienced safety at all. So when you do, if you, for that example, you go into a home, maybe there's a home where people are talking kindly to each other and doing things for each other, that's going to signal danger. This has never happened before. I've never seen
oh,
this before. I've got to be careful about this. So you have to, before we can make changes with our nervous system, we actually have to learn how to build our capacity for safety. So
mm,
start having those moments. So likely this child who was in your environment, he sort of had little moments of safety, which helped him build his capacity for safety, even though he wasn't able to probably appreciate it in all its glory kind of
yeah.
thing. Those little moments are what we're aiming for because the nervous system is not going to make big changes. It's not going to be forced to do anything. It needs to be invited, it needs to be done slowly, and it needs to be supported.
Mm. I've seen this also with a lot of the parents I've worked with that grew up in an emotionally dysregulated home, and they always said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to repeat that pattern. And they were very firm on it. And then they have children and they find themselves repeating the pattern. Then they fall into guilt, they fall into
Yeah.
shame, they fall into feeling like they're a failure and they just don't have what it takes. And I always, I mean, if you identify with this,
Yeah.
please know that's not true. And it doesn't have to stay like that. Like that's just a message loud and clear I want to give to each of you. Leah, what would you have to say to someone who identifies with that? I grew up in a dysregulated home. I never wanted it, and now I find myself
Hmm.
repeating that pattern.
I totally echo what you're saying. My answer when I hear people saying that is like, yeah, of course. Of course that's has been your experience. Even though we cognitively don't want something, we have brilliantly adapted in ways so that we can survive. So even though we deliberately want to make changes, our nervous system still has these imprints and still has this comfort level and this familiarity of this pattern. And so the first step is just that awareness. And we
Mhm.
want to have that awareness without the judgment. Like there's no, of course, when you grow up in an environment, you are going to end up recreating a lot of things, even if it wasn't healthy. And it's not your fault. But if you do want to, move forward, then it starts with getting to know your nervous system. Okay, so because emotional dysregulation is when you have a dysregulated nervous system. So your nervous system, I like to think of it as it's like this big umbrella. And it flavors all your thoughts, all your emotions, and all your actions. It flavors everything that you do. So when you find yourself emotionally dysregulated, then it's just really okay, I probably need to back up and take a look at what's going on with my nervous system. And if I can regulate my nervous system, then I will have access to more thoughts and more emotions and be able to show up much more intentionally rather than reactively. When we show up reactively, it's simply because this is a pattern that our nervous system has used for many, many years.
Mm, that just feels so validating. Like, of course, you're repeating the pattern if you haven't learned
Yeah,
anything to interrupt it.
yeah,
So what are some things we
exactly.
can do to interrupt that pattern if they're stuck in that pattern of can you
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
let's give an example. My classic example was my kid wouldn't put his shoes on.
Hmm.
I end up screaming at him, and then I feel horrible. And as I feel horrible, it's more likely that I'll scream at him next time he needs to put his shoes on.
Hmm.
I know how I interrupted it. I just want to hand it to you though. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think the awareness, because there's things that we do in the moment and there's the things that we want to do behind the scenes. The things that we want to do behind the scenes is build up that awareness and sort of get to know what our triggers are. And that may be just taking a step back and just saying, okay, what in this scenario of putting the shoes on is really triggering for me? I don't like it when, and you can get an idea. Maybe somebody doesn't listen to me, or I feel like I'm going to be late, and you can start
Mm.
identifying that. But really, the key in the moment is you need to slow things down. And slow things down, take a pause, take a break. I teach something called the safety sequence. And it's basically 3 steps that is my go-to for pretty much every time I feel dysregulated. And trust me, like I love this stuff. I teach this stuff. I do everything around this stuff. And I still get dysregulated. I still find
You
myself
mean you're
doing
a human too?
yeah,
Really?
exactly. I'm a human too. And sometimes I try not to have the shame of the spiral that happens when, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did that. But if you go back to the basics, the nervous system is safety, danger, safety, danger. We need to let your nervous system know that it's safe. And your brain is also never going to want to relax in an environment where it doesn't feel safe. So we actually have to like consciously establish safety because often what happens is we neurocept danger, but the neuroception can be off based on our previous patterns. So I'm neurocepting danger because this is the environment, my experiences in the past, but I'm not actually in danger. So the first question I like to ask is like, am I safe right here in this moment? And not was I safe in the past and will I be safe in the future? But it literally is, okay, here I am. I'm right in front of my son. He's talking about putting his shoes on. My nervous system is reacting as if I'm in danger, but I'm not. I'm safe. So saying I'm safe, dropping into my body, what's going on in my body? I always say, like, the next question is, do I feel safe? And normally, if your nervous system is starting to get activated, you won't feel safe. You're going to feel
Mm.
that tension or that stress or that dis-ease. And so it's just allowing yourself to let those bodily feelings, sensations come up. And then the third thing is to do something to acutely relax because you are in an activated state. When you're getting ready to yell at your kid, you're in an activated state. So acutely relaxing your body. And you can do that through a slow and low exhale, or what I love to do is something called the rag doll, where
I
it's sort
love
of
the
like
rag doll.
you sort of like you can tense up a little bit, or you just like let it loose. It's just let it hang and let your body become relaxed. And when you combine those things, it gives sort of that pause. You're safe. You are getting in touch with your body because your body needs to be involved. You can't think your way out of a stress response. Your
Mm.
body needs to be involved. And then when you relax your body, then your CEO is like, all right, I can come back on and I can help you out in this situation. And maybe we can have a calm conversation. Maybe we could do some reasoning. So that's what I do. In pretty much every situation you're going to ask me, I'm going to be saying to you the safety sequence. I just go through those 3 things and I do them hundreds of times a day. It just has become so
Mm.
automatic for me.
That's incredible. Yes, it was very empowering for me when I realized, yes, of course, our thoughts influence our emotions, but also our body is going to influence our thoughts.
Yes.
And that was so
Yeah.
empowering for
Yeah.
me. Now, whenever I'm in traffic or I'm running late, I just box breathe the whole time. So
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
controlled breathing.
Exactly.
The whole time,
Yeah.
if I'm really starting to white knuckle in traffic, I'll ragdoll
Yeah.
everything except for my hands, of course.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and
In fact, what's
yeah.
interesting about the brain body, we said the mind body is the nervous system. One of the primary roles in the body of something called the vagus nerve, which is the largest cranial nerve, it goes from, the brain stem, it has branches to the face and the heart and continues down to your core area. And it is a bidirectional cranial nerve. And it is responsible for getting us into what's called the parasympathetic state, which is a relaxed state of the nervous system. Well, what's so interesting about this bidirectional cranial, it's like a collection of nerves, is 80% of the traffic is from the body to the brain, and 20% is from the brain to the body. So when I do the math, I'm like, yes, I can relax my body through thoughts, but that's only 20%. What about this other 80%?
Yeah.
It is much more efficient for us to start with the body and move our way up. Now, ideally is we want it to be bidirectional as well, that I can fuel my thoughts can fuel my body.
Yeah.
But I know now, like if I start with my physiology, the psychology will follow.
Mm,
And it's easier access to my body because of that 80/20 rule.
yeah. And it's so nice when I feel like, oh, I just can't think. I shared recently here on the podcast about a dog attack that we had. Two big dogs lurched after my dog who was on a leash riding next to me on his bike. They like their owners trailing behind them with the retractable leashes. It was terrifying. And the long story short, we were safe at the end. I was terrified. I fell off my bike. Like
Oh,
I
for
have not
sure.
been that terrified in a very long time. And at the time they were saying, okay, what should we do next? Like people stopped to ask to help and they were like, how can we help? And I was like, I don't know. Like I literally could not think. And they were so sweet. We live in a great community. They're like, how about we move your bike off the road for you? And I was like,
Mm.
yeah, like I just could not
That's
think. And
good.
then I
Yeah,
had just enough logic to go
that's right.
control your breathing.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
just enough logic. I can't
yeah,
think. If I can't think, then I work on my breaths.
exactly.
And I
Yeah.
started
I
box breathing and oh goodness, then I was like, oh, now I can have a conversation again.
Yeah, yeah. I always say to people, when we get in that stress response, we lose access to our CEO and our language skills. We usually have enough, and I always say, like, use that enough to get yourself into your body through either, box breathing, relax, whatever your tools are, which kind of speaks to the importance of what I said beforehand. There's the in the moment stuff, but there's what are you doing behind the scenes?
Mm.
Because if you had not ever heard of box breathing, had not ever tried box breathing, I'm assuming because you thought of box breathing, it's something that you have integrated on a more regular
Yeah.
basis. You're practicing it because it's very difficult in a crisis moment. And that's for people out there who maybe are listening and thinking, like, I've tried breathing, it doesn't work. It's very difficult for tools to work in the moment when we're in crisis.
Yes.
We want to be practicing them over and over and over again so that they become so familiar that when something happens, your body literally craves that. Like, so
Mhm.
because you don't have access to thinking, your body was probably like, we're just needs to breathe. It wants to breathe. It wants to exhale. But it's because you've been building up that foundation.
Yes, I love it. I think to my last very traumatic event, like to that degree, was years ago. It was when I was in a car accident and I did not have any skill and anything to lean on. And so that makes perfect sense. I've been practicing quite a
Yeah.
bit over the years.
Yeah.
And and I really love that you bring up that idea to practice. You mentioned earlier about how you still get dysregulated. And I tell everyone I work with I'm very real and I let them know I'm not like inhuman. I'm
Yeah.
not robotic. And it's actually a good thing that we have some dysregulation, I think, because I feel like those little moments of dysregulation are when
Hmm.
we get to practice. And so
Yeah, for sure.
if we're in a hurry and we're trying to get out the door for school, my little girl runs upstairs and starts to play hide and seek, and I feel that little dysregulation. That's a really good moment for me to practice so that when the
Exactly.
bigger moments of dysregulation come, oh, I've got this. I've done this thousands of times already because my kids trigger me quite a
Yeah,
bit all
all the
day, every
time.
day. And so it's not bad that we're dysregulated. We talk about learning emotional regulation. And I want people to understand that doesn't mean you never feel dysregulation. It means you're able to handle it when it
Right.
comes.
Yeah. A healthy nervous system is not a nervous system that stays sort of regulated the entire time. A healthy nervous system is a nervous system that expands its capacity so that it could feel everything.
Mm.
And I think the difference when it comes to emotions, like if you have a healthy nervous system, it's not that you're going to not feel frustration or anger or any of those emotions. It's just that they're not going to hijack you and take you to places that are very reactionary so you end up being who you don't want to be. You're going to be able to handle them and show up in a way that you want to show up. Like you'll be able to process them in a healthy way instead of it just, taking over.
Yeah.
So our goal is actually flexibility. And our goal, like you said, that we want to be practicing. We even want to be practicing. Sometimes we want to deliberately disrupt. That's the whole idea of cold exposure or,
Mm.
activated breath work or high intensity workouts. These are things that deliberately stress our system so that we can learn to bring ourselves back. We're training for that resilience that we know we're going to need in life in general in the future because lots of stuff is going to happen.
Yeah.
And we don't want to suppress, or we can't suppress our stress response. We just want to become aware of it, allow it to be appropriately there because sometimes you are in danger and you do need to run. So we want it to be there and then be able to have the flexibility to return back home if it doesn't need to be activated.
This is great. And I'm also thinking of our children. And when we teach them emotional intelligence, oftentimes this was me as a parent when I first started our emotional journey. It was like, I want to teach my kids to not be angry. I want
Yes.
to teach my kids to not be anxious. I want them to not be stressed. I don't want them to get frustrated. And it's been a huge game changer to learn. Actually, I want them to learn what to do when they're
That's
angry. I
right.
want them to learn how to handle anxiety. I want them to
Mhm.
learn how to handle stress. And it's a learning curve sometimes. And for my kids, particularly for us being a neurodivergent family, I feel like it's a bit of a longer road. And what we learn at first doesn't always work. This is a lot of clients I work with. They're like, I I tried all the scripts that I saw online or whatever, and none of them worked. I'm like, well, because your child is different than the kid that
Exactly.
that script was written for. So let's find something unique for your child. But
Yeah.
the goal is never to like stop feeling. The goal is to learn to handle all of the
Mhm.
emotions,
All
the
of it.
happy, the excited, the surprised,
Exactly.
and the
Yeah.
frustrated, the lonely, the
Yeah.
judged, even the
Yeah.
hard emotions.
Yeah. It's to increase that capacity to have all those emotions. Because otherwise, if we suppress so many, like we sort of narrow our capacity of what emotions we can feel. And that can end up dulling out the negative ones, but also dulling out the positive ones.
Mm.
And often we end up feeling in a state of shutdown. I just don't feel anything. And
Mm.
this is part of nervous system regulation as well, is can I increase the capacity for safety, which will then allow all the quote unquote good emotions to come in, but it will also allow all the quote unquote bad emotions to come in. And that's what we want. That's what we
Mm.
want, the whole human experience.
Mm. This is fantastic. Okay, I could talk for 4 more hours, but I know everyone wants to know where they can go find you. Let us know where we can find you.
I am on Instagram at Leah Davidson Life Coaching, so or Facebook as well. There, I have a podcast called Building Resilience, and I just put out a guided journal that is available on Amazon, and it's a mental health journal for emotional well-being and nervous system care, and it's called Resilience.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Leah.
Thank you so much for having me.